All right. Well, we're here today with Professor Karen Fredriksen Goldsen, who is an internationally known scholar in areas of healthy aging and equity, and in particular, looking at LGBTQ older adults. She's been doing this research for years. She's housed in the School of Social Work at the University of Washington and is also the director of Healthy Generations Hartford Center of Excellence there. So welcome, Karen, and we will get all of the information about how you got into this work and what you're doing. So tell us what you do and, kind of why you were drawn to this work.
Great. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you everyone that's participating today. My name is, as Maggie shared, is Karen Fredriksen Goldsen, and I see my area of emphasis, my scholarship, really focusing on looking at both the intersections, but also marginalization and health and well-being. Mm-hmm. So I've worked with a number of what I consider underrepresented groups in research. Certainly what we'll be talking about today a lot is the LGBTQ work that I have conducted, the research that I've conducted. And I've also worked with a number of other, populations that have been underrepresented, including working with people in China living with HIV, working at cross-generational health in Native American communities, working a number of communities that I think experience health inequities, but are very resilient. And I've always been, wanting to understand this interplay between marginalization and resilience and health and well-being. And I currently am the principal investigator of the National Health, Aging, Sexuality, and Gender Study, Aging with Pride. And it's a 10-year longitudinal study, really following 2,450 sexual and gender diverse adults. And we've been following them for 10 years. And we just got funded to follow them for 5 more. And through this longitudinal study, we use that information to develop and test interventions. So we also have a very large dementia intervention project and many other projects.
Yeah. And I want to note to the students that this Aging with Pride is literally a seminal study. We have no longitudinal studies on the health and wellness of older and aging into old LGBTQ individuals. So it's quite a task. And you, of course, would be the one to do it. Interestingly, you brought up your work with individuals with dementia. And I note that you are working on a large project federally funded on social connection and isolation for individuals with dementia who don't have caregivers. Can you talk a little bit about that project?
Sure. This project, as I mentioned, we use our longitudinal findings to be able to then figure out what are major issues in the lives of these populations and these communities, and then to be able to develop and test interventions. So this particular project, we found that there's higher rates of subjective cognitive impairment in LGBTQ older adults. I think in part driven by both some of the risk factors in their life, including ongoing stress, the smoking, some other kinds of risk factors, higher rates of cardiovascular disease, as well as social isolation. So we saw those risk factors, and then we determined in analyzing population-based data that in fact there are higher rates of subjective cognitive impairment. So we developed, along with my colleague Linda Terry, who's professor emeritus here, who had a project that was very successful in supporting people living with dementia. We partnered and decided to develop IDEA, which is innovations in dementia empowerment and action, which is already a different way about thinking about dementia, and it's about empowerment and action. And so we developed that, and at that particular study, our goal there is we were actually using dyads. So we were enrolling dyads, so both a person with memory loss or dementia and a care partner. And we are on track. In fact, with COVID, we had an in-home intervention, and we shifted it to a virtual intervention. And we're on track with that particular project. And what it's doing is it's testing a standard program with a program that has been adapted to be able to address a very unique risk factors, stigma, some access to care, some other factors. Through that process, so that's on track, and we have 236 people that are enrolled in that project now, 116 dyads. So we're on track, but through that project, it's going to teach us a lot about dementia and empowerment in this community and how we best intervene. The results were really promising for this enhanced one that we've designed. But through that process, we found that about 50% of the people that wanted to enroll in that study, in that project, did not have a caregiver. And so even though they wanted to participate, this is people living with memory loss in the community that could not participate. So we designed another project. You know, we're led by the science.
That's right.
Our goal is to develop innovative science that can really address complex social issues and problems. So we realized that this gap exists, and it doesn't just exist in this community. In fact, I think it exists in many dementia interventions and programs. But we designed Idea Cafe, and it's Innovations in Dementia Empowerment in Action cafes. And instead of doing a coach with a dyad delivery, we're now doing groups and testing and intervention for people that are living with memory loss that don't have a care partner or a caregiver. And through that process, we also found that there's a number of caregivers that also didn't have a person with memory loss that could participate in the program. Could be for any number of reasons. Could be that they were so severely impaired that they couldn't participate, or that they weren't interested, but the caregiver wanted to participate. So now we have a full continuum of interventions. We have our dyad intervention. Now we have our 2 cafes, one for those living with memory loss and another for those for caregivers. So we're pleased that we're able to address this, I think, largely unmet need.
Yeah. And I like the way you describe this, because the science really follows the need, right? Like, yes. And they kind of circulate with each other. So when you find out something, when you're intervening that needs to be done, then you take it up and say, let's do this.
Exactly. Really cool. That's what's so exciting about a career like this, as well as, you know, just being involved in research. And all of our projects are engaged directly with community, so they're informed, and we collaborate, you know, directly with communities. And then we can, again, with that longitudinal study, the beauty of a longitudinal study is we can assess trajectories. We understand what happens over time. And then that really is helpful to be able to develop, design, test, you know, and evaluate interventions.
And Karen, I know that you and your team have been key in developing an adaptation of the life course theory, which you've been talking about in class, that looks at these trajectories, but unique to some of the issues that marginalized communities might experience. Can you talk to us a little bit about the iridescent life course perspective and maybe how that came about or how it's different?
Sure, I sure can. And remember, much of my work centers on working with communities that have been largely invisible. And so in our work, we want to shift that invisibility to making people and their lives visible. We started, I worked with and followed elders' work for a number of years, and other scholars on the life course, specifically how it applies to development, social, and historical contexts. And really wanted and was able to work with these life course theories. And again, this work is built upon those. But one thing we found is that there were certain aspects of the life course theory that could be considered very sort of heteronormative or normative to a particular type of experience. And that some people who lead very diverse and different lives may not see their lives reflected there, because when you think about timing, for example, timing in people's, when we think about the timing of a life course and life events, it may look very different for some communities than others. For example, in most life course theories, they consider, people dating and then marriage and then children. Well, we know that there are many LGBTQ people that were having children. They weren't even allowed to marry. So in some ways they were socially excluded from what we might consider normative kinds of events. So I became very interested in really thinking through what is the life course for these sexual and gender diverse people and other historically invisible populations. And that's how we came upon, and I do want to make clear that all my work that I talk about today is a team. We have a very large research team. About 20 people are in our research team, and it is the work of a team. But so through though thinking about the life course, I came across, well, it's what I see is the iridescent life course uses concepts and integrates concepts between both the social world, but also biological, because there's aspects of both physics in this, right? Just because of the way light, I'll talk more about that, but it's both the biological sciences and the social and health sciences, and it really comes together. Mm-hmm. Because iridescence itself is taken from the field of biology and physics, and it really invokes the interplay of light and environment in creating very dynamic and fluid, not only colors, but space. And it depends which angle and perspective that you see, that you're looking at the light and the changes. And to me, it really highlights the critical role of culture, time, and space in lives over time. Particularly, I'm applying it right now to sexual and gender diverse people, but we'll also be and are applying it to other groups.
Mm-hmm. I think that this is a good expansion, and in a lot of ways, a combination of good theories that are out there that help give us corners and different perspectives on what is a very traditional sort of developmental theory that is very useful, but I think also, may have limits. And I am going to provide a couple of resources for you guys to be able to read further about the iridescent life course. So.
Great.
Before I let you go, Karen, I wanted to know from your perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges that you perceive marginalized older adults face now that you might be either working on or you see, upcoming in the future to work toward?
I think it's very important, and I'm glad you're taking an intersectional approach. I think most scholarship has not. People are increasingly talking about the importance of an intersectional approach. And by that, I mean the multiple identities and just the multiple aspects of people's lives and sorting out how that's layered and how that results in both inequities in health, but also in good health. So I think it's very important we take a look at the continuum of health. That's certainly how we do our work. I think it's very important that as we raise challenges in people's lives and the inequities, that we're also really highlighting the resilience and the strengths in people's lives in a very real way, because for example, the LGBTQ older adults really are the pioneers, and they built the communities and they built the foundation upon the progress, built the progress that we all enjoy today. So I think that that's really important. I think another piece that's real critical now, of course, is the pandemic and the way that can also, especially for people who may have lacked access or where there's inequities in health, but all groups really, how that pandemic is going to play out over the next several generations in terms of access to resources and just health. I think that's really important. overall, I think there's so many new and exciting areas, and potentially to be able to investigate, and a lot of work is needed. I think it's very important to find effective ways to engage with communities.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we have had, a very high retention rate in our longitudinal study, one of the highest for a longitudinal study. People initially, it was difficult to obtain funding for a study like that. Initially, people didn't think people would participate, that they were too stigmatized, too whatever, they wouldn't participate. But in fact, it's one of the best cohorts. And so, and they have participated, and they're continuing to participate. We're just about 90% after 10 years. That's a very high rate of retention.
Yeah.
So I guess my point here is too, it's always interesting in science to look at people's ideas and their assumptions, and then test it and find out, many times assumptions aren't accurate. And so that is what science is about. It's about being able to get good information, and then not be driven by biases or stereotypes or even just ideas, but to find out what's really happening in the lives of people. And my last point is, I think it's very important that we realize, when we study groups that have been largely invisible or perhaps marginalized, that we understand that the information that we gather can really create new and good information that helps all communities. So that's also very important, because already, just that one example you asked me about, Maggie, about the idea cafes for people that don't have a caregiver. This certainly is an issue in the lives of LGBTQ older adults, but this is a growing issue for all populations. So it is how we learn from each other and across communities. I think those are all very important.
Thanks, Karen. That's awesome. I love those ideas, because I've always felt like connecting between each other and growing a body of knowledge is more important than publishing in your own little corner. So,
exactly, it really is. And the important thing is that we can all continue to learn from one another, and that's going to benefit all communities.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your time today. We appreciate it, and we will be reading more of your work.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.